Well, good morning. You know, over the last 2 months, Cleveland Police, under the leadership of Chief of Police Michael McGrath, has been conducting an administrative review of the lengthy pursuit that ended in East Cleveland. As you know, BCI is the lead investigating agency surrounding the use of deadly force. That investigation is continuing. Today, we're providing an update of our administrative review on the police pursuit. Under the Chief's direction, a committee has been reviewing records and interviewing police supervisors and other police personnel to determine if the pursuit followed police policy and procedures. Originally, we had projected that this review would be finished by the end of this month, and that recommendations for administrative charges, if any, would be forthcoming. But we aren't able to do that at this time for primarily 3 reasons. The first is that the investigation by BCI is ongoing, and they have requested additional time to re-interview some of our police officers before we conduct our interview. So that means that we have to wait until they are completed. We may have completed by now, but the fact that they're re-interviewing them and have requested us to hold off, we're going to honor that. The scope of the investigation has widened, and the number of officers involved is much larger than we originally anticipated, and that the level of thoroughness that we are demanding just requires that we take more time to do this and do it right with the kind of objectivity and fairness that we intend to use. After you hear from the director, Director Flask, and Chief McGrath, you will have a better understanding of what this really means and why we need more time to complete a more thorough review on our part. Given the amount of evidence, the number of individuals involved, and the ongoing investigation by BCI, it is difficult to determine at this time when we can give you a definite date when we will be finished, but you can rest assured that it will not be for a protracted long period of time, particularly since we're doing simultaneous investigation with BCI, where if we would have been handling the criminal side, there would have been about 3 months for the investigation, 3 months for the prosecutor to decide, and that's even before we would have begun to look at the administrative side, but now we're doing it simultaneously. We will give you, however, regular updates as we move forward and give you information as it becomes available. There will be a lot of information given to you today about what has happened and what we have done, and as we move forward, we'll give you whatever additional information we find. Ultimately, our goal is to ensure you and others that we are working in a way that we will know exactly what happened so that we can bring closure to all involved, the family of those who were killed, the families and the police officers involved, and the community as a whole. So now I'll turn it over to Director Flask, who will give you some information, and then he will turn it over to Chief McGrath, who will finish it up, and then I'll come back and we'll answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mayor. Good morning.
Good morning.
As the Mayor indicated, the review that's being conducted by the Chief and his staff is much more complex than what we had originally anticipated. At our first media briefing that we held within 24 hours of this incident, we indicated that there were 26 police officers at the scene, 13 of which we believed were involved in the use of deadly force. Well, since that initial briefing, our knowledge about the pursuit has grown, as has the number of police cars and police personnel that had some role in the police pursuit and the use of force. The Chief of Police and his team has reviewed and are continuing to review a significant amount of evidence and have already begun the process of interviewing police personnel. The chief will provide some additional information in a moment, but my role right here this morning is to share with you the scope, the magnitude of what's being done and what we know to date. We have at least 63 police cars that had some role in this pursuit, or 50 of those cars had automated vehicle locators, so their speed, directions were very clearly part of the evidentiary process. 13 of those police cars did not, but we do have information to support what they were doing at the time that they were actually engaged. The number of police officers that the chief and his staff, who the chief and his staff believe need to be interviewed, now totals 115, which is significantly higher than the numbers that we projected at the time this investigation began. What we've done to this point is all the audio communications that between the officers and dispatchers car to car has been obtained, and it has been transcribed into a written format so the chief and his staff can review it more clearly. All the video recordings that are available to us, including that from 205 West St. Clair, RTA, the Cleveland Clinic, the Brattonall Police Dash Cam, ODOT, and others have been reviewed by the chief and are part of this process. The automated vehicle locator system for all police cars that were on duty in the city of Cleveland at that time, not just those who were engaged in a pursuit, have been obtained by the chief and are again under review. The chief has begun the interview process, and he has begun the interview of supervisory officers working in the 1st, 4th, and 5th police districts. The members of the chief's team has gone out and physically driven the route during a time frame, or a comparable time frame in which this pursuit took place, so they could look at the pedestrian, traffic, road conditions, lighting, and other issues that are important as part of this investigative process. Just want to share with you the information that's available to the chief is really pretty extensive. It all has to be gathered, reviewed, and analyzed to determine and to ensure that the information that we ultimately release is accurate, fair, and we achieve a just outcome for everyone that's involved. Now, as you know, we're still continuing to cooperate with the Ohio BCI and I as their investigation continues, but our goal remains no different than it did November 29th, and that is a fair, thorough, and an impartial investigation. And I'll let the chief now talk a little more specifically about some of the steps that he's doing and taking.
Thanks, Director. Good morning, everyone. How is everybody? Okay, I want to start by reiterating that the committee reviewing this pursuit is being thorough, diligent, and is examining every piece of information possible to fully understand what took place during the pursuit and whether or not our policies and procedures were followed. At the end of the review, we will be able to make a determination about whether or not any personnel violated any rules, regulations, general police orders of the Division of Police. Now, as far as the review process, and there again, we're reviewing the pursuit. Logistically, the committee is about 99% complete. That means gathering all the duty reports, AVL data, video, etc. So we're about 99% completed with the logistical stuff relative to the review of the pursuit. What we currently know is that at least 63 police cars were involved at some level in the pursuit. Some of the cars were actually in the pursuit moving. Other cars blocked intersections. And this doesn't include cars from RTA, Brattonall, or State Highway Patrol. So as far as the police cars involved, currently we know there's approximately 63 cars. But some of those cars were terminated during the pursuit. That means they weren't there at the end. And some cars, their only responsibility that they undertook that particular evening is they blocked an intersection. They weren't part of the pursuit itself per se. BCI has shared with us that so far they have conducted 91 interviews. And that's police personnel, radio personnel, supervisors, etc. We anticipate, the review committee anticipates interviewing approximately 115 Cleveland police personnel. And there again, this includes patrol officers as well as supervisors and dispatch personnel. But let me say this, the final number of interviews by the review committee will be determined after the review committee has had the opportunity to review the interviews conducted by BCI. What that means is once we see an interview conducted by BCI and it involves a supervisor or a patrol officer, and we feel that our questions have been answered in that interview, we're not going to re-interview that particular individual. So we anticipate about 115, but once we receive the information and we have access to their interviews, that could be cut half to 60. I don't know at this point. We will not know until we're able to review the BCI file. To date, as of today, we've interviewed the supervisors from the 1st, the 4th, the 5th districts, and we'll be proceeding to the 2nd and 3rd district supervisors. In fact, we started last night with a couple 2nd district supervisors. But also, let me say this, is the State Bureau of Criminal Investigation has asked us to delay our interviews so that the state can re-interview some of these supervisors before they proceed. So in other words, BCI interviewed all the supervisors, and now they're going back and re-interviewing some of the supervisors in the 2nd, 3rd districts. So they asked us just to be patient till they complete their process as far as their file goes. We also, meaning the review committee, we issued orders to all personnel working during the time of the incident to confirm that they were not engaged in the pursuit. The goal of this action would be to be all-inclusive and either eliminate or verify that those on-duty personnel had no role in the pursuit. So what we're just trying to do is just be all-inclusive, just cover all our bases so we don't miss anything. Regarding the radio communications, not only have we transcribed the conversations, we have tracked the communications back to the individual radios so we can match personnel to the communication that you hear on the audio, that you hear on the radio. All this information, as well as any additional information that we discover as the administrative review continues to unfold, will be compared with our general police orders and rules and regulations. So as we proceed through this process, each interview, all the information that we obtain, we will look at our rules, regulations to ensure that they were complied with. While this administrative review is taking longer than I originally anticipated, I remain committed to conducting a complete review of what transpired during the pursuit and that incident in East Cleveland on November 29th. We will continue to cooperate with the investigation in the use of deadly force until it is completed. In other words, whatever BCI asks of us, or East Cleveland or Sheriff's Department, we will comply with their requests. As the mayor said, we will provide regular updates as we move forward with our review of the pursuit. And let me just restate that logistically, we are completed with 99% of bringing in all that information. And in closing, I would ask for the community's continued patience with this process so that we can give a full accounting of the actions of the Cleveland Division of Police that night in question. And thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Chief, a question, please.
Let me,
Excuse me.
thank you, I appreciate that. As you can see, there's a lot of information that's been gathered. Now we have to go through compiling it, putting together, making sense out of it. And then at the end of that, we will overlay the police procedures and policies and tactics over that. And as I've said in the past, if anyone is within that box doing it in a proper way, then they should have no concern. But if in overlaying that we find people outside of the box, then we will address that accordingly depending on what was done and the severity of it. So now you have something for the chief?
I do, Mayor.
Okay.
Chief, obviously your investigation is working in tandem with BCI. You made it clear that you're talking back and forth. So we'd like to know, were you able, have you yet found a weapon And could you determine whether either suspect fired on police yet?
Well, to your first question, I have no information relative to a weapon in that vehicle. The second question, that will be determined by BCI as far as if they fired a weapon or there was any type of residue on the particular individuals that were in that vehicle. That's a BCI question, that one there.
Yeah, and so that you, and I know you understand, is that under normal circumstances, we would do the criminal side and the administrative side. BCI is conducting that, and we don't know what they know. They're compiling what they have, and we get information as is released. So we don't actually know all of what they have. So there is difference. There's a firewall between the two of us.
Leila, this administrative review is focused on the pursuit. What about the use of force? Will that be another component?
That component, again, is what is being conducted by BCI. This did not happen in Cleveland, it happened in East Cleveland. If it had happened in Cleveland, then we would be conducting both ends.
But in
Sin-
terms of its compliance with the city policy, with the police policy?
Well, the same facts will be there.
Okay.
It's the same facts. Now, there are some things that are just lead to the criminality or lack thereof that is not relevant to the administrative side. The administrative side is just around policy, procedure, protocol, tactics. But there are some things, as you asked the question about residue and all this other stuff, that will be specifically related to the probable cause side or the criminal side, of which we will have nothing to do with, and I imagine it may have some impact, but not all impact on the administrative side.
What we will do is, once the criminal investigation is completed, then we will do administrative review relative to policies and procedures relative to the deadly force incident. I will also say this, is that BCI has requested and has obtained our policies and procedures relative to pursuits, et cetera. So it probably wouldn't surprise me if they had an opinion when they completed their investigation also concerning our rules and regulations, et cetera.
So can you, if I may, if I can do your job, could you explain when you said about once on the use of deadly force and we would do an administrative around the use, what aspect of that? So that they have a clear understanding of what's doing.
Once the criminal investigation is completed, then we will go through that entire file and see if our officers and detectives were in compliance with our rules and regulations. That's the first thing we'll look at. The second thing we look at, do we need to change our policies and procedures? Maybe they weren't good enough. We'll look at that. And then the third thing we look at is the tactics used during the deadly force incident. Were our officers and detectives in compliance with our training policy? Or maybe we have to improve our training policy or change something. We look at all those three areas, policies, training, et cetera, and then they'll issue a report to my office, and if we have to make adjustments in the way we do business, we will.
Ed?
Chief, quick question for you. We talked last week, you estimated it could be at least 61 officers and 51 patrol cars. And I know it's a fluid number, but now we're hearing about 63 cars and 115 people to be interviewed. So can you account for the sudden rise in the number of people that we believe are involved, and do we know the number of officers involved? I mean, is it 115 people that we think are involved in this whole operation, or can you clarify that?
Look, we know that there were 60-some cars, and we want to interview 115 officers, but that also includes dispatchers relative to this incident. Now, we're also going to sent out orders to interview. We sent out orders for additional information to everybody that was working that evening. What we want to be is all-inclusive here. And once we get all this information in through the interview process, then we'll have a better sense as the number of officers that were actually involved in the pursuit. Now, I said 61 cars. Some of those cars were terminated and they didn't follow in the pursuit. Some of those cars were just blocking an intersection and were part of the pursuit per se, but we have to look at the all-inclusive picture, and that's what we're doing. So that's why it's difficult to say, you know, Ed, I had 85 officers involved, you know, I might have had 85 officers involved, and 20 of those officers were blocking intersections. And now we're going through that interview process. But first we started with the supervisors, so we had a good sense on how they deployed their officers. You know, after interviewing the supervisors, we might find that hypothetically, if I had 80 officers involved, maybe only really 30 of them were actually involved in the pursuit. So that's a process that we're going through. And the most important thing we had to do first was to get all the logistics. So we know where everybody's at. So now we'll go through the interview process, and we also have to refer to BCI because they're conducting the interview process. And in some instances, I have to believe we won't be interviewing officers twice if initially they provided the information we were looking for, and you know, BCI obtained that information for us.
Chief, just doing the eyeball test and just from looking at preliminary results, what type of disciplines should we expect, and could some officers be fined?
You know, sir, I can't answer that question right now. I have to wait until the process is completed before I could answer that question.
What we can tell you is that the process of discipline, once someone is charged, then there's a charging process, and anything, I think, up to 10 days suspension is the chief's determination. Anything from 10 days to 30 days is the director's determination, and anything on termination is reviewed with me. So we couldn't tell you what that would be.
Mayor, what conversations has the city had with the Justice Department and FBI during this review?
Oh, I have none. I have had none with the FBI and with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We made the request for them to come in and look at our policies and procedures, and they were taking it under review. I'm pretty sure either this month or next month or sometime in the near future, they will determine if, in fact, the U.S. Attorney's Office or the Justice Department will do some review of how we do business. So that is the only conversation I've had with them.
Do you think they could be asking you to change some policies in regards to pursuits and use of force?
Well, anything can happen when people look at stuff, just as the chief said, when he looks at his own policy and you apply that to what happened in this situation, he may be making some changes. So there's possibilities for everything. But that's why we asked them to come take a look. So if they see something with a different eye than we would see it, then we take that
But
as
again,
serious.
just to clarify, that would be something that's going to be happening next. That's not happening.
That is two things. That is something we have requested. They have not said whether or not they would do it. And then at the same time, we have actually hired an outside consultant that has done preliminary review. But knowing that since we hired them, there would be some criticism, well, since you hired them, don't you determine their outcome, which we wouldn't, but we understand that. That is why we went to the Justice Department and asked them if they would also come in. I'm pretty sure that if they do come in, they make that choice. If they have findings, it would be similar, if not identical, to the consultant report.
Can you talk about the committee's review of the pursuit route and what was seen during that drive, and then at the end point of that, what was your assessment of the scene where everything happened?
The review committee, you know, initially after the pursuit, they drove the route 3 times. And then last week, they drove it again at the same time at night when this all took place. They didn't determine anything new from the previous times that they did the route that the pursuit took. So they didn't find anything new. They didn't find any new cameras or anything else. But they did, that's the 4th time the committee has taken the time to drive that route that the pursuit went.
Chief, could you tell us what members are on this review committee? Who are they and how they were selected?
Well, the review committee is made up of a commander who oversees our use of deadly force incidents, because he has the most experience. He's very, very qualified. We have the OIC from the inspections unit. Inspections, that's the unit within the Division of Police that ensures that people comply with our rules and regulations. Then we have representatives from the districts to help us because they have experience running their own personal districts. And then we have representatives from Community Relations and also from the Office of Professional Standards. Community Relations, because they represent the families of the victims, and then Office of Professional Standards, they represent the community, because you have the Civilian Review Board, et cetera, so they're part of the process. So we have total transparency. It's a great committee. They're doing a wonderful job.
But do we have a number in names that we can associate with this?
I'd rather give it to you. The Public Information Officer will provide the names of the officers and the folks that are involved in our committee.
Last question, Bill.
Chief, once BCI is done, is that their findings, are they going to be turned over to the county prosecutor's office? And will he have the ability to either take the case himself or turn it over to the U.S. Attorney's office if he decides to do that?
When BCI has completed their criminal investigation, that file will be presented to the county prosecutor, and then he'll have several options he can take. He can do it himself, he can find an outside independent prosecutor, or they can go directly to the grand jury with it. And maybe he has other options I'm not aware of, but that will be determined by the county prosecutor. It will be his decision. And if I may, real quick, we were talking about PERF. That's the Professional Police Executive Research Forum. It's an independent think tank out of Washington, D.C., and we brought them on board a year ago to review our deadly and non-deadly force policies and procedures. And at our initial meetings, we also invited the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they sat at the table with us during our initial meetings. We had representatives from the U.S. Attorney Steve Dettelbach's office, and they also flew in 2 attorneys from the Civil Rights Division of Washington, D.C. to be at the table. So initially, even before this incident took place, we wanted total transparency with the U.S. Attorney's Office and obviously the Civil Rights Division of the United States government to ensure that we had good policies and procedures relative to deadly and non-deadly force.
Chief, with the disciplinary action, are you going to wait, if there are any charges, will the whole process have to go through, whether to no bill or to indict, or before you guys take any action against any individual officer?
You know, it's hard for me to give you a very definitive answer on that, but it depends on what the review committee finds relative to the pursuit. If it's not going to impact the criminal end of it, and we will talk to BCI before we move forward with any administrative charges, then we'll go ahead and move forward with administrative charges before there's a completion on the criminal end of it. So this is going to be a cooperative effort between ourselves as far as the administrative review on the pursuit and the criminal investigation being conducted by BCI, East Cleveland, and the Sheriff's Department. But we're in constant contact with those folks, exchanging information, so we're all on the same page, and we don't want to hurt either or as far as their investigation and our review.
Chief, how many cars were actually pursuing the vehicle?
Actually pursuing the vehicle, we're probably looking at right around 50, 51.
And is the number of how many were at the scene at the end still 26, or is that number higher?
That number will become higher. The ones that eventually got there, you know, the pursuit was over, the deadly force was over, and there were still cars coming to the scene, supervisors.
How many were pursuing that man?
Yeah, I think, you know, and you know, that's a difficult question because, you know, and I'm using hypothetical numbers now, strictly hypothetical. And originally there's 6 cars chasing. In the middle of it, there's 12. A little farther, it's 18. Then it drops off, and at the end, it might be 20. It's changing constantly as it goes through districts, because when it gets into a district, it goes into the first district. First district cars go to support the pursuit. When it tends to leave the first district, those cars are terminated. So while it's in the first district, it may have 10 cars. When it leaves the first district, it may go down to 8 cars. So that's a motion. That particular number is constantly changing during the pursuit. And once we tie this all together with the interviews, we'll be able to drill into it a little better.
How often do you have one
one officer in the car, and how often you have two in this case?
Oh, it just depends. It depends on who's working that evening.
And what's the total number of people in the police department?
1,500.
Very good. Thank you, everybody.
How you doing?
Good, yourself?
I'm good, thanks.